This wedding is over." The words hung in the air of the opulent ballroom, stark and cold, a shard of ice in the warm, champagne-fueled atmosphere. I watched as my brother-in-law, a man whose smug face I had wanted to punch for the better part of a decade, stared at me, his mouth agape. His bride, my wife's cousin, looked as if she'd been slapped. And my mother-in-law, the matriarch of this gilded cage, had a look on her face I had never seen before, pure, undiluted shock, a crack in the marble facade she presented to the world. It was a look that told me I had finally, after all these years, done something she had never anticipated. I had fought back. But this moment of public detonation was not the beginning of the story, not even close. To understand how we got here, to this point of no return, you have to go back. Back to the silence, the grief, and the quiet rustle of a turning page that changed everything. It all began in the suffocating quiet that follows a death. My wife, Olivia, was gone. A car accident on a rain-slicked road had stolen her from me, from our 2 children, Leo and Maya, and from a world that was immeasurably brighter with her in it. The first few weeks were a blur of condolences and casseroles, of hollow-eyed relatives patting my shoulder and telling me to be strong for the kids. Strength felt like a distant country I had no passport for. My world had been a vibrant tapestry, woven with the threads of our shared life, and in an instant, the master weaver was gone, leaving behind a frayed and meaningless mess. Olivia and I had been a team. We were the kind of couple that finished each other's sentences, not because it was cute, but because we had spent 15 years so deeply entwined in each other's thoughts that our minds often ran on a parallel track. I was a high school history teacher, a profession that offered modest pay but immense personal satisfaction. Olivia had been a freelance graphic designer, her creativity a brilliant counterpoint to my more structured academic world. We weren't rich, not by her family's standards, but we were happy. We had a small, cluttered house filled with books, art supplies, and the joyous chaos of our children. We had love, genuine and deep, a fortress we had built together. Or so I thought. Olivia's family, the Caldwells, had never approved of me. To them, I was a mild-mannered, bespectacled nobody who had somehow tricked their brilliant, beautiful daughter into a life of suburban mediocrity. Her father, Robert, was a corporate titan, a man who moved markets with a single phone call. Her mother, Beatrice, was the queen of his empire, a woman draped in silk and diamonds, whose smile never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. They tolerated me at family gatherings, their politeness a thin veneer over a core of condescension. They called me Tom, which was not my name. It was Mark. They knew it was Mark. They did it for sport, a petty power play to remind me of my insignificance. Her older brother, Julian, was the worst of them. He was a carbon copy of his father in ambition, but lacked the intellect or the charm. He was a vice president at his father's company, a title he held not through merit, but by birthright. Julian treated me with an open, sneering contempt that bordered on comical. He would make jokes about my teacher's salary in front of everyone, asking if I needed him to spot me for a round of drinks, his laughter echoing just a little too loudly in the cavernous rooms of the Caldwell estate. Olivia would always defend me, her voice sharp, but the damage was always done. I would retreat into myself, feeling like a ghost at their feast. I endured it for Olivia. I loved her more than I hated their arrogance. I saw how she struggled, caught between the world she had chosen with me and the one she had been born into. She loved her family, despite their flaws, and for her sake, I swallowed my pride, smiled through the insults, and pretended not to notice the constant, subtle campaign to marginalize me. After she died, their campaign became less subtle. Beatrice and Robert descended upon my home like vultures, circling a fresh kill. They weren't there to comfort me or their grandchildren. They were there to assess, to take inventory. Beatrice walked through my house, her manicured fingers brushing over our worn furniture, a faint look of disgust on her face. Olivia deserved so much more than this, she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. Julian was more direct. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was trying to make sandwiches for the kids, their small faces still etched with a confusion that broke my heart. "Look, Mark," he said, finally using my real name, which was somehow more insulting in its gravity. "Dad and I have been talking. You're obviously not equipped to handle this. The kids, the house. It's a lot for a guy like you. We think it would be best if Leo and Maya came to stay with us for a while. Permanently." I froze, the bread knife in my hand. "What did you just say?" "It's for the best," he continued, oblivious to the rage that was beginning to simmer beneath my grief. "They're Caldwells. They need to be raised in a certain environment, with the right resources. You can't give them that. We can." "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Don't be emotional, Mark. This is a practical matter. Get out of my house. Now." He scoffed, a look of pity on his face. "We're just trying to help. You'll see. It's the only way." He walked out, leaving me trembling, not with sadness, but with a white-hot fury I hadn't felt in years. They weren't just disrespecting me anymore. They were trying to erase me. They were trying to take my children. That night, after I finally got Leo and Maya to sleep, I wandered through the silent house, a ghost in my own life. I ended up in our bedroom, the air still thick with Olivia's scent. I needed to feel close to her, to find some guidance in the wreckage of my world. I saw a stack of boxes in the corner, things I had cleared from her small home office. Among them was a chest where she kept her journals. Olivia had always been a writer. She chronicled everything, her thoughts and feelings, spilling onto the page in a looping, elegant script. I had never read them. They were her private space, and I respected that. But now, she was gone. The privacy felt different, like a locked room in a house I was now the sole occupant of. With a sense of trespassing that was quickly overwhelmed by desperation, I opened the chest. There were dozens of them, leather-bound volumes stretching back to her college years. I picked up the most recent one, its cover a deep shade of blue, her favorite color. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed that felt impossibly large without her, and I began to read. The first few pages were filled with the mundane beauty of our life. She wrote about Maya losing her first tooth, about a funny movie we had watched, about a picnic we'd had in the park. She wrote about her love for me, passages that made tears stream down my face. "Mark is my anchor," she wrote. "In the stormy sea of my family, he is my calm harbor. He doesn't know how strong he is." I read for hours, losing myself in her voice, feeling her presence beside me. It was both comforting and excruciating. I reached the middle of the journal, my eyes gritty with exhaustion. I turned a page, and there it was. Page 53, an entry dated just 2 months before her death. The handwriting was different. It was jagged, frantic. The ink bled in places as if tears had fallen on the wet words. My blood ran cold before I even read the first sentence. "My mother is a monster," it began. "I always knew she was cold, that she was controlling, but I never knew the depths of her cruelty. I never knew she was capable of this." My heart started to pound in my chest. I read on, my world narrowing to the spidery script on the page. "I went to see her today, to tell her. Not about the diagnosis, I can't. I could never tell anyone. But I went to talk about Julian's wedding, to try and smooth things over after his latest joke at Mark's expense. She was in her study. She looked at me, her eyes like chips of ice, and said, 'Olivia, we need to discuss the future, your future.' I thought she was going to lecture me about my finances again, but it was worse, so much worse. The next paragraph made the air leave my lungs. She knows. Somehow, she knows about the aneurysm. She has a doctor friend at the hospital. She must have... She broke every rule of privacy and ethics. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't cry. She looked at me with a terrifying kind of clarity and laid out her plan. Her contingency plan, she called it. She told me that once I'm gone, she and Dad will petition the court for custody of Leo and Maya. She said they have already retained a law firm, that they have been building a file on Mark for years. He's a fine enough placeholder, Olivia, but he is not a father capable of raising Caldwell children. He is weak, unstable. We will prove it. We will paint him as a depressed, incompetent man who is a danger to his own children. We have the money and the influence to make any narrative a reality. When you are gone, we will correct the mistake you made in marrying him. The children will come home. They will be raised by us, and in time, they will forget all about their history teacher father." I had to stop reading. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt the journal slip from my numb fingers. This wasn't a recent idea born of my grief. This was a premeditated, cold-blooded plot. They had been waiting for my wife to die so they could steal my children. Julian's words in the kitchen weren't an impulsive offer. They were the first move in a war that had been declared long ago, a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. I picked up the journal again, my hands shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. The final sentences of the entry were almost illegible. I tried to argue. I screamed at her. I told her she would be destroying them, destroying Mark. She just smiled, that terrible, serene smile. "It's for the best, darling," she said. "Family must be protected." I looked into my mother's eyes today and I saw nothing. No love, no soul, just a black, gaping void of ambition. I don't know what to do. How can I fight her? How can I protect them? My God, Mark, I am so sorry. I closed the journal. The silence of the house was no longer one of grief. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. The tears were gone, burned away by the fury. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. Olivia's words, "He doesn't know how strong he is," echoed in my mind. Maybe she was right. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a placeholder. They thought they could roll over me, erase me, and steal the only thing I had left of her. They had underestimated me. They had made the fatal mistake of pushing a quiet man too far. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, sleeping street. They had started a war. I was going to finish it. I would not just protect my children. I would get justice for Olivia. I would take their world, their money, their power, their precious family name, and I would burn it all to the ground. This was not a thought born of anger, but a quiet decision, a vow made in the dead of night to the memory of my wife. The underdog was done playing dead. The days that followed were a masterclass in duplicity. I had to become two people. On the outside, I was the grieving widower, just as they expected. I let my beard grow. I wore the same sweater for 3 days. When Beatrice called, her voice dripping with false sympathy, I sounded lost and broken. "I just don't know how I'm going to manage, Beatrice." I'd sigh into the phone, playing the part they had written for me. I could almost hear the triumphant smirk on the other end of the line. Inside, however, a different man was taking shape. The history teacher who loved dusty books and quiet evenings was being replaced by a strategist, a general planning a campaign. Every condescending phone call, every passive-aggressive text from Julian, just checking in to see if the kids have been fed today, I saved. I started a new file on my computer, password protected with a name Olivia and I had once joked about for a pet we never got. I named the file Operation Chimera. I began documenting every interaction, creating a timeline of their harassment. It was meticulous, methodical work, and it kept the rage from consuming me. It channeled it, focused it into a sharp, pointed weapon. I knew I couldn't do this alone. They had armies of lawyers and endless resources. I had a teacher's salary and a mortgage, but I had something they didn't: the truth. And I had Olivia's final gift to me, a clue hidden within her despair. In her journal, on the page after the horrifying revelation, she had written a single cryptic line. Maybe Uncle Michael was right all along. He saw the rot before any of us. Uncle Michael. He was Robert's younger brother, the family pariah. I had only met him once, years ago, at a strained family Christmas. He was a journalist, a sharp, cynical man, with eyes that seemed to see right through the Caldwell's polished facade. He and Robert had had a spectacular falling out decades ago, something no one ever spoke about. He was excommunicated, his name erased from the family history, as effectively as they planned to erase mine. Finding him was my first objective. It wasn't easy. He lived off the grid, as much as anyone can in the digital age. But I was a history teacher. Research was my superpower. I dug through old news articles, public records, and finally found a lead. A small, independent newspaper in a remote town in Vermont. He was listed as a contributing writer. I found the paper's general email address and sent a message into the void. "My name is Mark Turner," I wrote. "I am Olivia Caldwell's husband. She passed away recently. I believe you knew her. I need to speak with you urgently. It's about Robert and Beatrice." I didn't hold out much hope. For all I knew, he hated the Caldwell name so much, he he would delete the email on sight. But 2 days later, a reply appeared in my inbox. It was from a private, encrypted email account. The message was brief. "I'm sorry about your wife. She was a good kid. I'm in a town called Northwood. There's a diner called the Maple Leaf on Main Street. Be there Saturday at noon. Come alone." That Saturday, I told the Caldwells that a friend was taking the kids for the day so I could have some time to myself. Beatrice's response was cloying. "Oh, you poor thing. Of course. Take all the time you need to process." The subtext was clear. "Go ahead, fall apart. It only helps our case." The drive to Vermont was 5 hours long, a journey through winding country roads as the landscape shifted from suburban sprawl to dense, green forest. It gave me time to think, to rehearse what I would say. Northwood was a tiny speck on the map, a town that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. The Maple Leaf Diner was exactly as you'd picture it. Red vinyl booths, a long Formica counter, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. I saw him immediately. He was older, his hair grayer, but the sharp, intelligent eyes were the same. He was sitting in a corner booth, a newspaper spread out in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his gaze intense, analytical. "Mark," he said, his voice a low gravel. It was a statement, not a question. "You look like hell." "I feel like it," I admitted, sliding into the booth. A waitress came over. Michael ordered black coffee for both of us without asking me. "So," he said, folding his newspaper with deliberate precision. "You said it was about Robert and Beatrice. Olivia's gone. What do they want now? The kids?" His directness startled me. "How did you know?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Because I know my brother, and I know his wife. They're collectors, of companies, of houses, of people. They see those children as their property, a continuation of their precious dynasty. You were always just the inconvenient sperm donor in their eyes." The raw truth of his words was oddly comforting. Here was someone who saw it, who wasn't blinded by the Caldwell wealth and power. I took a deep breath, and I told him everything. I told him about the years of subtle humiliation, about Julian's threats, and finally, my voice cracking, I told him about page 53 of Olivia's journal. As I spoke, Michael's face hardened, his expression shifting from cynicism to a cold, controlled anger. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the quiet street. "I knew Beatrice was a snake," he said finally, his voice low. "But I didn't think even she would stoop to that, weaponizing her own daughter's death before it even happened." He shook his head slowly. "The rot goes deeper than I thought." "Olivia wrote that you saw it," I said. "The rot. What did she mean?" Michael took a long sip of his coffee. "My brother and I, we built that company together, from the ground up. In the early days, we were partners, equals. But then he met Beatrice. She wanted more, faster. She convinced him to take shortcuts, unethical deals, creative accounting, pushing the legal boundaries until they snapped. I wanted out. I told him he was building a house of cards on a foundation of lies. He told me I was jealous and naive. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The final straw was a deal in South America, a mining operation. To secure the land rights, Robert, at Beatrice's urging, paid millions in bribes to a corrupt regime. But it was worse than that. The government used that money to fund death squads to clear out indigenous villages that were in the way of the mine. People died, Mark, a lot of them. I had proof, memos, wire transfer records. I confronted Robert. I told him he had blood on his hands. He didn't even deny it. He just said it was the cost of doing business. Beatrice told me that if I ever went public, they would destroy me. They would fabricate a story, claim I was an embezzler, that I was mentally unstable. They would use their army of lawyers to bury me in litigation until I was broke and broken. I believed them. So I took what proof I had, and I walked away. I let them buy my silence in the form of a modest settlement and a non-disclosure agreement that I was too scared and too beaten down to fight. The air in the diner suddenly felt thin, heavy. This was it. This was the critical discovery, the key to unlocking their downfall. It wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about a crime so monstrous, it made their arrogance and greed seem petty by comparison. "Do you still have it?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The proof." Michael stared at me, his eyes searching my face. He was weighing me, judging my resolve. "It's in a safe deposit box, a ticking time bomb I never had the courage to detonate. Why? What are you going to do?" "They think I'm a weak, emotional history teacher who's going to fall apart," I said, my voice filled with a newfound steel. "They are about to find out that history teachers understand one thing very, very well. Every empire, no matter how powerful, has a fatal weakness. And you just told me what theirs is. I'm not going to just defend myself, Michael. I'm going to expose them. For Olivia, for the people who died, and for my kids." A slow smile spread across Michael's face, the first genuine warmth I had seen from him. It was a predatory, wolfish smile. "I've been waiting 30 years for someone with the guts to burn that house of cards down. Olivia's husband. Who would have thought?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished key. "This is for the box. I'll also give you the name of a lawyer. Not some slick corporate shark, but a bulldog, a guy who despises people like my brother. And Mark," he said, his eyes locking with mine, "when you do this, you can't hesitate. You can't show mercy, because they will show you none." I took the key. It felt heavy in my palm, a weight of responsibility and a promise of retribution. As I drove the 5 hours back home, the grief was still there, a constant ache in my chest. But it was no longer a debilitating fog. It was fuel. The quiet, grieving widower was gone. In his place was a man with a key, a lawyer's name, and a mission. The investigation had begun. I was no longer on the defensive. I was on the hunt. The next phase of my life began with a phone call. The lawyer Michael had recommended was named Elias Vance. He wasn't part of a large, polished firm. His office was a small, cluttered suite of rooms above a bakery, the air faintly scented with yeast and sugar. Elias himself was a man who looked like he wrestled bears for a hobby. He was built like a refrigerator, with a bald head, a thick gray beard, and eyes that missed nothing. I sat across from his scarred wooden desk and laid out the entire story, starting with the years of petty insults and ending with the key Michael had given me. I handed him the copy I had made of page 53 from Olivia's journal. He read it, his expression unreadable. Then he read it again, slowly. When he looked up, the placid, slightly bored look in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a focused, predatory gleam. "Well, I'll be damned," he rumbled. "I've seen some nasty custody fights in my time, but this is a special kind of evil. Premeditated character assassination as a long-term estate planning strategy." He leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "So, the Caldwells. I know the name. Untouchable, or so they say. They want to paint you as an unstable father, and you want to, what, paint them as war criminals?" "I want to protect my children," I said firmly, "and I want justice for my wife. If that means exposing what they are, then yes, that's what I want." Elias grinned, a fearsome sight. "I like you, Mark. You're a history teacher. You deal in facts. Let's get some facts." That was the beginning of our covert operation. The first step was the safe deposit box. Elias and I went together to a dusty old bank in a town I'd never heard of. Using the key and a power of attorney Michael had overnighted to Elias, the bank manager led us into the vault. The box was long and thin. Elias slid it out and placed it on the table in the small viewing room. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of documents and a single cassette tape. We spent the next week in Elias's back office, a room he called the War Room. The documents were exactly what Michael had described, internal memos from Caldwell Industries, signed by Robert, authorizing facilitation payments to offshore accounts linked to South American government officials. There were copies of wire transfers and handwritten notes from Beatrice, urging Robert to handle the problem of the indigenous land claims with finality. It was a cold, damning paper trail of corruption and complicity in murder. "This is dynamite," Elias said, his voice a low hum of excitement. "But it's 30 years old. Robert will claim they're forgeries. He'll say his disgruntled brother faked them. We need more. We need to connect this old rot to the present day. While Elias began mapping out the financial web, my job was to continue playing the part of the broken man and to gather evidence of the Caldwell's current campaign against me. I became a master of surveillance. I put a voice-activated recorder in the front hall of my own house. When Beatrice would stop by, unannounced, just to see how the children are, her syrupy words of concern would be followed by cutting remarks once she thought I was out of earshot. "The house is a mess, Julian," she'd whisper into her phone. "He's clearly not coping. The children look neglected." It all went on tape. I saved every email, every text message. Julian was particularly stupid. He sent me a link to an article about single fathers suffering from depression with the message, "Thought you might find this helpful. Don't be afraid to ask for help before you hit rock bottom." He thought he was being clever, building his case. In reality, he was handing me rope to hang him with. Elias used a portion of my small savings to hire a forensic accountant, a quiet, brilliant woman named Anya, who could make spreadsheets sing. She took Michael's old documents and started cross-referencing them with publicly available corporate filings. She discovered that the shell corporations used for the bribes in the 80s were never dissolved. They had just gone dormant, then were reactivated a decade later. Their names slightly changed, used to hide assets and evade taxes on a massive scale. The old rot wasn't gone. It had metastasized. It was the foundation of the modern Caldwell empire. "They're arrogant," Anya said during one of our late-night meetings, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop. "They got away with it for so long they thought they were untouchable. They didn't cover their tracks properly because they never believed anyone would have the nerve to look." Meanwhile, the Caldwells were escalating. I received a visit from Child Protective Services. A stern-faced woman and a younger, nervous-looking man stood on my doorstep, saying they'd received an anonymous tip expressing concern for my children's welfare. I knew exactly who the anonymous tipper was, but instead of getting angry, I was calm. I invited them in. They saw a clean, if cluttered house. They saw happy, healthy children who, when asked, talked about how much they loved their dad and how he read to them every night. They saw a refrigerator covered in their drawings and a freezer full of food. I showed the social workers my lesson plans for school, the kids' report cards, a photo album Olivia had made of our family life. I was the picture of a devoted, loving father struggling through an immense tragedy. When the lead social worker left, she gave me a sympathetic look. "For what it's worth, Mr. Turner," she said quietly, "it seems to me you're doing a wonderful job. Sometimes anonymous tips are just malicious." Her official report, which Elias later obtained, was glowing. It was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall I was building. The most difficult part was maintaining the facade with my own children. Leo, who was 10, was old enough to sense the tension. "Why does Grandma Beatrice keep saying we should come live in her big house?" he asked one night as I was tucking him in. "She said you're very sad and need a long rest." My heart broke. I sat on the edge of his bed. "Grandma is just worried," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But you, me, and Maya, we're a team, and we are not going anywhere. This is our home. I'm sad because I miss Mommy, but I am not too sad to be your dad. Never." He seemed to accept that, but the conversation stiffened my resolve. They were trying to poison my own children against me. There was no line they wouldn't cross. The final piece of the puzzle came from the cassette tape we had found in the safe deposit box. It was old and unlabeled. Elias had to find a special audio forensics expert to digitize and clean up the recording. It was a phone conversation between Michael and Robert, recorded by Michael 30 years ago. On it, Michael was pleading with his brother. "People are dead, Robert. Don't you understand?" And then Robert's voice, cold and clear across the decades. "It's a rounding error, Michael. It's the cost of building an empire. You can either be a part of it, or you can be a footnote. Beatrice and I are prepared to do whatever it takes to protect what we've built. For our family. For Olivia. So you need to decide if you're with us or against us, because there is no middle ground." Elias and I listened to it in silence. "That's the ball game," Elias whispered. "That's Robert Caldwell, in his own voice, admitting he knows and doesn't care. The arrogance, it's breathtaking." We now had a three-pronged attack. First, the custody case. We had Olivia's journal, The recordings of Beatrice's threats, the texts from Julian, and the glowing report from CPS. We could dismantle their claim that I was an unfit father with brutal efficiency. Second, the financial crimes. Anya had prepared a preliminary report that detailed decades of tax evasion and money laundering, all stemming from the original sins Michael had documented. It was enough to trigger a massive federal investigation. Third, and most devastating, was the old crime. The bribery, the complicity in the deaths of innocent people. While the statute of limitations might protect them from criminal charges on that specific crime, the public revelation of it, backed by Robert's own voice on that tape, would utterly destroy their reputation. The Caldwell legacy they were so desperate to protect would be revealed as a blood-soaked fraud. All this time, I maintained my cover. I went to work. I took care of my kids. I fended off the Caldwell's intrusions with a weary sadness that they completely misread as weakness. They were so confident, so wrapped up in their own narrative of my incompetence, that they never saw the axe swinging. They were busy planning my downfall, completely unaware that I was orchestrating theirs. The quiet history teacher was about to give them a lesson they would never forget. The Caldwells made their move, just as Elias predicted they would. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. Inside was a formal notice. Beatrice and Robert Caldwell were petitioning the family court for emergency temporary custody of Leo and Maya Turner. The hearing was scheduled in 1 week. The documents were filled with legalese, but the message was clear. They cited my deep depression, my inability to maintain a stable household, and a pattern of erratic behavior following my wife's death. They had affidavits from a housekeeper I'd fired for stealing, and a disgruntled neighbor whose dog I had reported for barking. It was a web of half-truths and outright lies, spun by a high-priced legal team to create a picture of a man on the edge. "This is it," Elias said when I brought him the documents. "They've built the stage. Now we just have to put on our show." The week leading up to the hearing was the longest of my life. I had to continue the charade, pretending to be panicked and overwhelmed. I called Beatrice, my voice trembling with manufactured fear. "Beatrice, what is this? Why are you doing this?" Her voice was as cold and smooth as marble. "It's for the children, Mark. You'll thank us one day. My lawyers will be in touch with yours." "Oh, wait, you probably can't afford a real lawyer, can you? Don't worry. The court can appoint one for you." She hung up. The condescension was so thick I could have choked on it. They truly believed they had already won. They saw me as a bug to be squashed, a minor inconvenience on their path to getting what they wanted. The day of the hearing was gray and overcast, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. It matched my mood perfectly. I got Leo and Maya ready for school, my hands moving with a calm, deliberate purpose. I hugged them both tightly before they got on the bus, telling them I loved them more than anything in the world. As the bus pulled away, I felt a surge of pure, cold determination. Everything I was about to do, I was doing for them. I met Elias outside the courthouse. He was wearing a surprisingly well-tailored suit that made him look even more imposing. "Ready to go into battle, Professor?" he asked, a grim smile on his face. "I've been ready for a long time," I said. We walked into the courtroom. It was a small modern room, all light wood and institutional carpeting. The Caldwells were already there, assembled like a royal court. Robert, tall and imperious in a dark suit. Julian looking smug and important, whispering to his father, and Beatrice. She was the picture of tasteful, matriarchal grief, dressed in black, a single strand of pearls at her throat. She looked at me as I entered, her expression a perfect blend of pity and resolve. It was a masterful performance. They were flanked by a team of 3 lawyers who looked like they had been carved from granite. They thought this was their arena. Their world of power plays in legal maneuvering. They had no idea they had walked into my trap. The judge entered, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, named Judge Esposito. She had a reputation for being sharp, fair, and having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. The Caldwell's lead attorney, a slick man named Davenport, began. He painted a masterful picture of a family consumed with concern for their beloved grandchildren. He spoke of my fragile mental state, my inability to cope. He called Julian to the stand. Julian was a terrible actor. He tried to look sad and concerned, but his natural arrogance kept breaking through. "Mark's just not himself," he said, shaking his head sorrowfully. The house is a mess. The kids seem adrift. I'm worried he might do something drastic. He's not stable enough to be looking after them. Then Beatrice took the stand. She was good, very good. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke of her daughter Olivia. All I want, she said, her voice thick with emotion, is to honor my daughter's memory by ensuring her children are safe and cared for. Mark is a good man, but he is broken by grief. He needs help. He needs to heal. And while he does, the children need stability. They need family. They need us. She looked directly at me, a flicker of triumph in her tear-filled eyes. She thought she had sealed my fate. Judge Esposito looked at me with a questioning, slightly sympathetic expression. It was time. Elias rose. Your Honor, he said, his deep voice filling the silent courtroom. The Caldwell family has painted a very moving picture of familial concern. However, it is a work of fiction, a carefully constructed narrative designed to achieve a long-held goal. We are not here today to debate my client's grief, which is profound and real. We are here to talk about a calculated, malicious campaign to steal his children. A murmur went through the Caldwell legal team. Davenport shot to his feet. Objection! Counsel is being inflammatory. Overruled, Judge Esposito said, her eyes narrowed at Elias. But watch yourself, Mr. Vance. You'd better be able to back that up. Oh, I can, Your Honor, Elias said calmly. He turned to Beatrice, who was still on the stand. Mrs. Caldwell, you testified that your only concern is the welfare of your grandchildren, correct? Of course, Beatrice said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. And that this concern only arose after your daughter's tragic passing? Yes. Seeing Mark's decline, it forced us to act. Elias walked back to our table and picked up a single plastic-sleeved document. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence a certified copy of a page from Olivia Turner's private journal. Page 53, to be exact. The handwriting has been authenticated. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. As Judge Esposito read, her eyebrows climbed higher and higher on her forehead. A deep, stony silence fell over the room. I looked at Beatrice. The color was draining from her face. She knew exactly what was on that page. The judge looked up from the journal, her gaze now ice cold as she fixed it on Beatrice. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. This journal entry, written by your daughter 2 months before she died, describes a conversation in which you laid out a detailed plan to take her children from her husband after her death, based on private medical information you obtained illicitly. A plan in which you stated you would prove he was an unfit father. Does that sound like a concern that arose only after your daughter's death? Beatrice stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. That's not... She was unwell. She was imagining things. That's a sick fantasy. A sick fantasy, Mrs. Caldwell? Elias's voice boomed. Let's listen to another one. He signaled to his assistant, who pressed a button on a laptop. A voice filled the courtroom. It was Beatrice's voice, from one of the calls I had recorded. You are nothing, Mark. A temporary fixture. Those children are Caldwell's, and they will be raised as Caldwell's. I will see to it. We have the money and the power to make you disappear from their lives. You will be a bad memory. Do you understand me? The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Beatrice was ashen, her carefully constructed mask of the grieving matriarch utterly shattered. Robert looked stunned, his hand gripping the table. Julian looked like he was going to be sick. Judge Esposito stared at Beatrice with a look of pure disgust. Mrs. Caldwell, you may step down. But Elias wasn't finished. The power shift in the room was palpable, a physical change in the atmosphere. We had gone from defense to offense, and the Caldwells were reeling. Your Honor, Elias continued, his voice like rolling thunder. This isn't just about a cruel and premeditated custody grab. It's about the character of the people petitioning this court. It's about their fitness to be anywhere near these children. The Caldwells have built their case on the idea that they can provide a more stable environment, but their entire world is built on a foundation of lies, corruption, and criminality. Davenport was on his feet again, sputtering. Objection! This is outrageous. Counsel is making wild, unsubstantiated accusations. On the contrary, Elias said, placing a thick, bound report on his table. This is the preliminary report from a forensic accountant detailing decades of systematic tax fraud, money laundering, and the use of offshore shell corporations to hide assets. The very same shell corporations, I might add, that were used 30 years ago to bribe foreign officials in a deal that resulted in the deaths of innocent people. He let that hang in the air for a moment. The courtroom was now so quiet I could hear the frantic, shallow breathing of Julian next to his father. "And finally, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice dropping to a dramatic, almost conversational tone, "we have this." He signaled his assistant again. This time, it was Robert's voice that filled the room, tinny and distant from the 30-year-old cassette tape. "It's the cost of building an empire, Michael. Beatrice and I are prepared to do whatever it takes to protect what we've built. You're either with us or against us, because there is no middle ground." The recording clicked off. Robert Caldwell, the corporate titan, the untouchable patriarch, sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He looked like a statue of a man who had just watched his entire world catch fire. The power had not just shifted. It had been annihilated. The tables hadn't just been turned. They had been smashed into a million pieces. The calm reveal was over. The collapse was about to begin. The silence in the courtroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that follows an explosion. Every eye was on the Caldwell family, watching as the edifice of their power and prestige crumbled in real time. It was Beatrice who broke first. The mask of the elegant matriarch didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. A strangled, animalistic sound clawed its way out of her throat. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and unrecognizable. She surged to her feet, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "He's lying, all of it. Forged documents, doctored tapes. He's a monster. He's trying to destroy us." Her lawyers tried to restrain her, murmuring, "Beatrice, sit down," but she shook them off, her face contorted into a rictus of pure, unadulterated panic. The performance was over. This was the real Beatrice Caldwell, stripped bare of her silk and pearls, revealing the frantic, cornered creature beneath. Robert remained frozen, his face the color of old parchment. He stared at the opposite wall, seeing not the courtroom, but the ghost of a 30-year-old crime that had finally come to collect its due. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. Julian, the arrogant foil, simply dissolved. His smug confidence evaporated, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of a child who has just realized the adults are not in control. He looked back and forth between his screaming mother and his catatonic father, his mouth hanging open, unable to process the sheer scale of the catastrophe. Judge Esposito's face was a thundercloud. She slammed her gavel down, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. "Silence!" she roared, her voice cutting through Beatrice's hysterics. "Mrs. Caldwell, you will be silent, or I will have you removed." Beatrice seemed not to hear. "He can't do this. We are the Caldwells. We—" "Bailiff," the judge yelled, "escort Mrs. Caldwell from my courtroom." Two uniformed bailiffs moved towards her. That finally seemed to penetrate her panic. She shrank back, her eyes wide with horror, as they took her by the arms. "No, get your hands off me," she screeched, but her fight was gone. They led her out, a queen being frog-marched from her own throne room. Judge Esposito then turned her glacial gaze upon Robert and Julian. "Mr. Davenport," she said to their lead lawyer, her voice dangerously quiet, "you and your clients have abused this court. You have filed a frivolous, malicious petition based on lies and a disgusting, premeditated plot against a grieving man. You have wasted this court's time and resources." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Turner," she said, her tone softening for the first time, "the petition for custody is dismissed with extreme prejudice. They can never file against you on this matter again. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. Mr. Caldwell Jr., you are to have no contact with Mr. Turner or his children. None. Do you understand me?" Robert gave a slow, barely perceptible nod, his eyes still vacant. Julian just stared, trembling. "Furthermore," The judge continued, looking at Elias. Mr. Vance, you have presented this court with evidence of serious criminal activity. I am legally obligated to report this. I am instructing my clerk to deliver a copy of this forensic report and your other exhibits to the District Attorney's Office and the Internal Revenue Service immediately. That was the kill shot. If there was any hope left in Robert's mind, that sentence extinguished it. The financial empire was gone. The reputation was gone. Their freedom was gone. This hearing is concluded, Judge Esposito said, banging her gavel one last time. She stood and swept out of the courtroom without a backward glance. A flurry of activity erupted. The Caldwell lawyers huddled around Robert and Julian, speaking in frantic whispers. Elias simply put a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Mark, he said quietly. You won. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I looked across the courtroom at what was left of the Caldwell dynasty. Robert was being helped to his feet by one of his lawyers, looking like a man 100 years old. Julian was openly weeping, his face buried in his hands. As we walked towards the exit, I saw him. Michael. Olivia's uncle was standing at the back of the courtroom, leaning against the wall. He must have slipped in after the proceedings began. He caught my eye and gave me a single, slow nod. It was a nod of respect, of gratitude, of a shared, bitter victory. 30 years of silence had finally been broken. I walked out of the courtroom and into the main hall of the courthouse. The air outside the room felt fresh, clean, and then I saw them. 2 men in plain, dark suits were standing there, speaking quietly to the bailiff, who had been at the door. As Robert and Julian stumbled out of the courtroom, dazed and defeated, the 2 men approached them. Robert Caldwell, one of them said, his voice flat and official. He held up a badge. I'm Investigator Davies, DA's office. We need you and your son to come with us. We have some questions for you. The final humiliation was swift and brutal. There were no flashing cameras or dramatic arrests, just a quiet, efficient removal. The great Robert Caldwell, a man who could move markets, was being politely escorted away by 2 civil servants, his reign over. Julian followed like a lost lamb, his face streaked with tears. I stood there and watched them go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound and heavy sense of release, as if a mountain I had been carrying on my back had suddenly turned to dust. Elias clapped me on the back, a gesture that almost sent me stumbling. Let's get you home to your kids, Professor, he said. I walked out of the courthouse into the weak afternoon sun. The gray clouds had started to break. I took a deep breath of the cool air, the first truly deep breath I had taken in months. It was over. I had protected them. I had kept my promise to Olivia. The war was won. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. The story exploded. The quiet, dignified world of the Caldwells, a world built on the illusion of old money and civic leadership, was torn apart in the press. Industrialist detained in decades-old fraud and bribery scheme, screamed the headlines. The sordid details of the custody battle, leaked from anonymous court sources, added a layer of personal depravity to the financial crimes. The Caldwell name, once a symbol of power and success, became synonymous with scandal and disgrace. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Faced with Anya's ironclad report and Robert's own voice on that damning tape, the Caldwell empire crumbled. Their assets were frozen by federal investigators. Their company, Caldwell Industries, was suspended from trading and soon collapsed into bankruptcy. The board of directors, a collection of men who had owed their careers to Robert, scattered like rats from a sinking ship, each one trying to distance themselves from the stench of the scandal. Robert, broken and ailing, was released on bail but confined to his mansion, a prisoner in his own gilded cage. Beatrice, after her courtroom meltdown, had a genuine collapse and was checked into a private psychiatric facility, her mind finally snapping under the weight of her own shattered world. Julian, in a desperate act of self-preservation, did exactly what a coward like him would do. He turned on his parents. In exchange for a plea deal, he agreed to testify against his own father, detailing the more recent tax evasion schemes he had been a part of. It wouldn't save him from prison, but it would reduce his sentence. The family, the entity Beatrice had been willing to kill and steal for, had devoured itself. I was insulated from most of it, protected by Elias, who acted as a bulldog at my gate, fending off reporters and legal inquiries. My life became quiet again, but it was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the suffocating silence of grief, but the peaceful silence of safety. The phone no longer felt like a threat. The doorbell was no longer a cause for anxiety. About a month after the hearing, I got a call from an unlisted number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the button. Hello? A collect call from the West County Correctional Facility for Mark Turner. Will you accept the charges? A mechanical voice droned. My blood ran cold. I knew who it was. After a moment's hesitation, I said, yes. There was a click, and then a voice, thin and reedy, a pale imitation of the imperious tone I knew so well. Mark? It was Julian. What do you want, Julian? I said, my voice flat. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, he stammered. My mother, she pushed everything. I never wanted to take the kids, not really. I was just going along. The pathetic excuse, the shifting of blame even now, was so perfectly Julian that I almost laughed. You made your choice, Julian, I said. You stood in that courtroom and you lied. You were ready to take my children away from me. I know. But please, Mark, can you talk to the prosecutor? Tell them I was coerced? For Olivia's sake, she wouldn't have wanted this, to see the family destroyed. The audacity of it, using her name now after everything they had done. The last vestiges of any pity I might have had for him evaporated. You don't get to say her name, Julian. Not you. Olivia knew exactly what you all were. She wrote it down. That's why we're here. You destroyed the family yourselves a long time ago. You're just finally seeing the rubble. I could hear him starting to sob on the other end of the line. Please, Mark. Goodbye, Julian, I said, and I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. It was the final, pathetic plea, the last gasp of a dying dynasty. I felt nothing. A week later, Michael came to visit. He showed up at my door unannounced, holding a bottle of expensive-looking whiskey. He looked 10 years younger, the cynical, weary weight in his eyes replaced by a kind of peaceful clarity. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Julian had threatened me what felt like a lifetime ago. We didn't talk about the Caldwells, not directly. We talked about Olivia. He told me stories from when she was a little girl, before Beatrice's influence had fully taken hold. He told me how she was bright and funny and kind, how she used to defend him against Robert's jibes even as a child. She was the best of them, he said, staring into his glass of whiskey. The only one who got out with her soul intact. He looked at me. She picked a good man, Mark, better than any of us knew. When he left, he handed me a thick envelope. What's this? I asked. My settlement from Robert all those years ago. The price of my silence. I never touched it. It's blood money. I want you to use it for Leo and Maya, for their college, for their future. It's not Caldwell money anymore. It's Olivia's legacy. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. You didn't just get justice for yourself, Mark, he said. You got it for me too, and for a lot of people whose names we'll never know. Let me do this. I took the envelope. It felt different from the key he had given me. That had been a weapon. This was a tool, something to build with. The emotional release came unexpectedly. One evening, I was tucking Maya into bed. She was holding an old, worn teddy bear that had been Olivia's when she was a girl. Daddy, she said, her voice sleepy, is Mommy ever coming back from her trip? I had explained to them that Mommy was gone, that she was in heaven, but the finality of it was still too big for her 4-year-old mind to grasp. My carefully constructed composure, the strength I had worn like armor for months, finally broke. I sat there, holding my daughter's small hand, and I wept. I cried for Olivia, for the life we lost. I cried for my children, who would grow up without their mother. And I cried with relief, because I knew with absolute certainty that they would be growing up with me. They were safe. The battle was over, and in the quiet of my children's bedroom, I finally allowed myself to truly, deeply grieve, not as a warrior, but just as a husband who missed his wife. 6 months later, the world was a different place. I sold the house. It held too many ghosts, too many memories of the battle I had fought within its walls. Using the money from the sale and a part of the fund Michael had given me, I bought a smaller, simpler home in a town 100 miles away, closer to my own parents. It was a new start, a clean slate. The new house had a big backyard with an old oak tree, perfect for a swing. As I pushed Leo and Maya on a sunny afternoon, their laughter filling the air, I felt a sense of peace that I thought I might never feel again. The shadow of the Caldwells was gone, reduced to a half-forgotten story in the business pages. Their empire was being sold off in pieces to pay their debts and fines. Their grand mansion was on the market. Their name was a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. I still had Olivia's journals. I kept them in a locked box in my study. I hadn't read them again, except for one, page 53. Sometimes, late at night, I would take it out and read her frantic, terrified words. It wasn't to relive the horror, but to remind myself of the stakes, to remind myself of the woman who, even from beyond the grave, had given me the weapon I needed to save our family. Her words had been a light in the darkness, a map through the valley of the shadow of death. I had learned that grief is a strange and powerful thing. It can drown you, or it can forge you into something stronger. My love for Olivia, the very thing that caused me so much pain, had become my armor and my sword. The Caldwells, in their arrogance, saw my grief as a weakness they could exploit. They never understood that it was the source of my power. They were fighting for greed, for pride, for a legacy built on lies. I was fighting for love. It was never a fair fight. They thought strength was about money and influence, about bending the world to your will. They were wrong. Strength is getting up every morning to make your kids breakfast when your heart is shattered into a million pieces. Strength is facing down monsters, not with a roar, but with a quiet, unyielding resolve. Strength is protecting what matters, no matter the cost. In the end, I didn't find closure in their destruction. I found it here, in this quiet backyard, in the sound of my children's laughter. I found it in the simple, profound act of being a father. I had honored Olivia not by avenging her, but by preserving the beautiful, normal life she had chosen with me. I had protected her most precious legacy, our children. Sometimes, when the world is quiet, I think about that final, pathetic phone call from Julian. She wouldn't have wanted this, he'd cried. He was wrong. Olivia wouldn't have wanted the fight. She wouldn't have wanted the pain or the ugliness. But she would have wanted this peace, this safety, this future for her children, free from the rot of her family's ambition. Page 53 was her final act of love, a desperate plea for help. I hope, wherever she is, she knows I heard her. I hope she knows we're okay. We're finally okay.